My relationship with John and the Goralka Law Firm starts with my mother, who was a trustee for a very close friend of hers who she had known for 40 years. And her friend had chosen John Goralka to set up an estate for her. And so years later, I come to find out that my mother has been named as a successor trustee. I think it was 2010. Her friend passes away. My concern came about my mother's health because she wasn't able to do everything that needed to be done, pretty much confined to a wheelchair. And I called John up and I said, what happens if my mother passes? What happens to this estate? What do we do then? I said, before you answer that, I said, I will volunteer, but I don't want any compensation for it. Because I really don't want anything to do with these people. I just want to fulfill my mother's obligations. In the meantime, I can fill in, and literally, I'm sure I drove thousands of miles, spent hundreds of hours, doing this, doing that, sort of thing, which was fine. My mother loved her friend, and I wanted to do that for her. Well, what struck me about John through each stage is his patience and how well he explained things to me. He would be very kind to my mother, who is in her late 80s and now in her mid-90s, to explain things in such a way that it was slow. He would get acknowledgement from her and make sure that she understood, and then follow up with me about the things I needed to get done, and we'd put time frames on things and I would get busy. When we started dealing with the savings bonds, and we went to the safe deposit box, I mean, that stack shows up like this, and John looks at me, I look at John, I said, what do you do with these? They're a different color. I've never seen a $1,000 savings bond. Who buys those? Well, they bought them back then, but then they had her husband's name on them, and it doesn't say and or. So we have to find the death certificate, certify it, send all this stuff in to get that part changed, and then it goes from there to this new beneficiary, because they had to be reissued to the beneficiary. It's just not something you hand to them. Ultimately, John's kindness, his patience, and most of all, explaining what needed to be done, what time frames need to be accomplished. Other parties who were not beneficiaries to this complained loudly. Everybody got what they were intended to get. There became a lot of challenges because there was a lot of money involved in this. There was more than one relative involved in this. So it was, I can only imagine what was going on behind the scenes, because I'd only see the front end of it. And every now and then John would have met with them. And I think it was a very contentious meeting for John, and he would just kind of fill me in on some of the details about it. And so he maintained a lot of patience and care for the right people, to care for his client. Throughout it all, John and his staff, and I dealt with a number of folks, were so gracious. We could do things by email or by a phone call. John was very sensitive to, did I have to drive all the way across town? And I said, well, I don't mind. I said, just, tell me what needs to get done. And he was always good about that. I could always reach him. I could always find him. He was a gentleman and a professional that I, to this day, have utmost respect for.